Hello, tis I, Matt, and we're going to do a couple of new enclosures, or we're going to start them, because I've got plants coming that are going to go in them. So we have mesh for a drainage layer, we have balls for a drainage layer, and we've got two to do, because we've got the apophysis, sub-adult, well, juvie, bit of both, 6 inches, half grown, to rehouse, and the LP, the Lasiodora parahabana, which is the younger one, not Rusty, who's the big girl who's already in her bioactive. This is the slightly younger 6 inchish kind of one, Squidge. I've had her since she was the size of my tip of my thumb. So she's a bit of a bigger girl now, and her enclosure is rubbish, and that's my bad. I didn't have much substrate left when I did her last, so she hasn't been in there too long, but it's time to posh her up a bit. So we're going to sort these out for those. I'm going to do it all in one go because it's just easier. So we've got the drainage layer mesh, which is to separate the hydro balls from the cocoa fibre and peat moss mix, and there's a bit of sphagnum moss in there as well, and a little bit of peat, sorry not peat, like charcoal substrate, a little bit, which just helps with things like plant growth and things like that. We've got some live moss, sphagnum moss, it's nice and moist. We can chuck on top of the hide like I tend to do. I like to build 2 levels, so I give them enough ground space, but their hide has a lot of substrate on top of it as well as inside it, so they can dig their hide out, or burrow into the pre-made burrow if you like, the starter burrow, and then on top of that there's another lot of earth and moss on top, so they get their full floor space whether or not they go in the hide. So they have essentially 1.5 floors to walk around on and their hide to go in, so they get a little bit more space without having a massive tank. They will end up both in bigger tanks than this because the apophysis might get to 10 inches, maybe more, and obviously the LPs aren't far behind them. So these aren't final homes. I mean, they could be. A lot of people do keep those size spiders in these, but I'd like to give mine a little bit more room because I like to make a bit more of a display of them when they're big. So we're going to do this as quick as we can because we're going to do 2 at the same time. Same setups basically. We're going to do everything we can up until putting the plants in because they're not here yet, quite honestly. So we're going to do this one first, I think, because one needs a slightly bigger hide because because Squidge is already, like I say, about 6 inches. There goes my paintbrush. So we're going to move one of these out of the way briefly because we're going to do that. Well, we're going to unpack it and do it at the same time, but we need space to unpack this first one. So move our bits of cork bark, which will make us a nice little hide later on. Now we're using the Exoterra medium mesh, which is a 60 by 45 centimeters or 24 by 18 inch. And you can just cut it down to size a little bit, and that will also leave you with a couple of little bits left over if you wanted to do some smaller mini bioactives, if you've got some spiders that like it humid and you want to be a bit overzealous with their little mini enclosures. Some people do. Right, so first things first, let's unpack it. I'm going with the Komodo. I'm not sponsored or anything. I'm not important enough or popular enough on YouTube to have any of that jazz going on. But that's fine. Get rid of that. Now I like these. They do have a mesh top, which a lot of people are against. I personally have never had any issues in 15 years with these screen tops. These are a bit better though than that sort of silvery, wiry, more kind of miniature chicken wire stuff. That can be a bit more catchy. Maybe some people do have issues with that, but this smooth, sort of very rigid stuff, I've had spiders walk right across it and no issues. Even big, heavy-bodied ones. It's not very high, so as long as you give them enough substrate and they haven't got any further than their leg span to fall, or even less, they'll be fine. I've never had anything get its toes caught in it at all. I have actually seen one of the younger ones get its toe caught in one of the acrylic hole ventilations, oddly enough, which is what a lot of people suggest replacing these with. So I think both can have their hazards, but as long as you don't give enough space for it to damage itself, I really don't see an issue with these. or the others, to be honest. So anyway, let's get this unpacked. I like these because they're really simple, but you get a lot of viewing space from them. There's not a lot going on lid and sort of plastic rims wise. They're just very clean looking basic glass window boxes, which is nice if you want to do something kind of naturalistic like we do. I'm just going to get this wrap off. There we go. So just take that off, and I'll just pop that over there because we won't need that for a while. So first things first, stick it on the bottom, that doesn't matter. So these are all nice and watertight, they're all silicone sealed in here. And the lid slots in, so that little catch on the front, you've got to be gentle with it because if you snap it back too hard, it's plastic and it will start to weaken at the hinge. But if you just pop it like that and then pull it out rather than trying to do that, then they don't have any issues. So first things first, drainage layer. We don't need too much because it's only a little one, and we're going to leave a lot of room for substrate so we can pop plants in it and they'll bed in properly. So we'll chuck some of this in. Spread that out, see what coverage we got. Tiny little bit more. You don't need loads, and you don't want to lose too much substrate room. You just want to push that out to the edges. And as long as there's a good coverage, and it's like more than just one, but not say 3-5 stones deep, and they go right to the corners, that should be fine. I'm just going to have a look from the front because obviously I can't see what you can see. I'm going to move you in a bit closer while we do this. There we go. Make sure you're in focus. Right, so I think that's good enough. Put those in there. Right, we can pop our separation mesh in. I'm not going to worry if it upturns a bit, that's fine. It just means it's a little bit of margin, so when the substrate goes down on top, you can't drop too much down the sides. Although, do you know what? I think that is a little bit too big. Let's see if this other bit I've cut is a slightly more natural fit. That's a bit better. Just a little bit of extra mesh, but not so much that it's not going to sit well. Although, you know what, I think been a bit generous. So I'm just going to trim that, make sure it's a straight edge. So this stuff is basically just permeable cloth. It's like a sort of nylon-y plastic material, I suppose. But you can use anything that's permeable enough to do the same job. It doesn't have to be this specialist mesh. People use things like J-cloths quite successfully. As long as it allows moisture through, then it will work. That's better. So just a tiny little trim, and now it sits pretty much flat, but still with enough extra to stop any substrate disappearing down the sides. Speaking of substrate, we've got plenty of that mixed up here with our leaf litter and our moss there. I've got a little bit of a fake plastic plant, a large water dish for both of them, same size one. And here is our substrate. So we've got lots of stuff mixed up in there. There's a bit of vermiculite, There's some bits of sphagnum moss and tiny little bits of cork bark, and we're going to pop some springtails in there as well, which are going to be the cleanup crew. So, get my jug, make this a little bit less messy. I'm going to pop some substrate on top there. I'm going to give it a good amount because we want it to be nice and deep so they can dig around if they want to. I'm going to make them starter burrows. They are primarily terrestrial, but they're still opportunistic burrows, so they might dig. So make sure you give them enough to do that with. I'm just going to see how much that works out to when I spread it out. Bearing in mind we're going to put a starter burrow in here, so we don't want to put all of the substrate in just yet. So that is not quite as much as we're going to want. I'm going to put one more scoop in there. Now, be mindful of where your lid's going to go in. So if you want to open it from the front, decide where you want your water bowl. I personally like to put one at the back, so I can just open it a little bit, not bother the spider if it's in its burrow, which I'm going to put about here. So, and a bit of bits of cork bark. These were together, but it wasn't quite wide enough because the spider is going to grow while it's in there. So we're going to improvise with what we've got and see what shape hides we can make and whether or not we're happy with them and which way round we want the cork bark, etc. Now I quite like to have a big hide and fill it with quite a lot of substrate and have it so it sits quite near the front. So when the spider does hopefully use the burrow you start for it, it will like to sit somewhere you can see it whilst feeling secure enough to let you look at it. So I'm going to take some of this substrate out of there and dig a bit of a recess to put these longer bits of cork bark in. But I'm also going to snap a little bit off that to make it fit a bit better, because if we can get them closer together we can get a bigger hide. There we go. See, I really like that. So I'm going to shove loads of substrate in there. Don't worry if you scrape down to the bottom of your mesh, you've got more substrate to put in. Always have loads mixed up because you never really can underestimate how much you might need for optimal digging potential, because some of them really do like to dig, so give them an obvious place where there's something to dig. See how that's pretty much filled up. I'm just going to dump a load more on top and inside that bit at the same time. And I'm going to put a load more where I've taken it from, because we don't want to have it too shallow. I'm going to use up a lot of my substrate doing this, but it's fine because I've got a lot more mixed up and I have another brick if I need to for the other one. So they'll both have more than plenty enough to dig. See, I'll chuck loads on top like that. So if they dig through, it's fine because they can dig through. There's something to dig towards. And if they dig out to the back corner, it's fine because the cork bark is all the way to that back corner, so they'll be supported. You can't collapse in on them. And also it just makes it a bit more of a scene. So I'm quite happy to use the rest of this bucket I've got and maybe a bit more substrate. So I'm just going to chuck it all in. I've got another half a critter keeper, large one, full of substrate that I mixed up as well. It's the same mixture as this, so there's bits of sphagnum moss in there. And I'll just put enough to cover that, but this is completely full. So it can dig all the way to the back of that. See, it's not too deep. I can chuck more in there, and I'm not putting the spider in today because obviously the plants aren't here. So I can put a lot more in. But I mean, you can see how much it's got to dig at the back. And there's a bit more weight on there, so it's pushed that down, but the mesh is still separating the balls in the corner. I can see that. That's all good. Just going to double check you're still in focus. And I'll zoom you in a bit more, I think. And you can see the substrate is moist. I've packed it down. It's not very wet because it has been drying out in that bowl for quite a while, just with a little sheet on top to stop it going actually dry. There we are. So I'm quite happy with that top layer. I can put more substrate around this bit, but for now I'm going to pop some sphagnum moss and leaf it up on top to give that a bit of a natural look. Not too much, just enough that I can rely on it to keep some humidity in the soil underneath, which isn't a great layer, so it's good to have something like moss on top to retain a bit. And it just gives it that little extra effect, bit of texture. Not mad amount, just good little coverage. And I only put this on half the tank, so if it doesn't particularly like walking on moss, some spiders don't like particular surfaces, but I found most of them are quite happy to walk on it. It's not very wet, it looks a lot wetter than it feels. It's just moist. I don't wet it in the bag, I just leave it in there to retain whatever moisture it's got already. And then I'll let it dry out in here a bit more than it was in the bag before I put a spider in, just so it's not too soggy. We're going to pop our springtails in there, so they're going to do the cleanup if there is any mould or fungus, but a little bit of mould can't hurt your spider. You can have mushrooms growing in there and it's alright, as long as you don't have things from outside that could hurt it, parasites or whatever. But we're not doing any of that business here, we're just popping things that we've bought that are specifically for this purpose. So, and I'm not going crazy with this, I'm just covering the top half of the hide with the moss. There we go. Now, I like to have one side humid and one side dry, so you only have to worry about controlling water in one end. And a big water dish for these guys, because they will not have any issues with a big water dish because they're pretty big spoons. So put that in there. So that's the wet end, if you like. And hopefully you can see all this. It's not the greatest day to film, it's quite bright in here. But I'm going to move that closer and see if that looks a bit better. You can see a bit clearer what I'm doing at least. Anyway, right, I'll crack on. It might not look the best, but it's nice to film these things. Right, we're done with that bucket because there's no more substrate left in it. Okay, so like I say, we haven't got any real plants here yet, but we can cheat in the meantime and just pop a little fakey in there. Not too bad. And now, like I say, I might add some more substrate to the front just to fill this bit out here. In fact, I will do that. So I like to really blend the cork bark into the substrate, if I can. It just makes it look more like the foot of a tree or something they might actually live in nature. It's just aesthetically pleasing. A lot of people don't do it like this. A lot of people only do it like this. It depends what your preference is. But I like to, if I can, make it as natural as possible. and I've been redoing a lot of my enclosures lately, so this is just another one. There you go, not crazy deep at the front, but it's almost up to the top by, I'll say, 2.5 inches at the back and in the hide. So that should encourage it to dig that out and make it its home. So now I think we're happy with the substrate amount there. I'm just going to even that out a bit. I like to sort of cover leaves up with a bit of dirt as well. It just makes it look a bit more realistic, if you ask me. And also some moss, just little bits at the front, just sort of sprinkled about, and then leaf litter can be sprinkled about as well, just to make it look a little less. This side is substrate and this side is moss. Looks like a bit of natural thing. You can have a little bit of everything knocking about the place, and then you can just mix it up a bit. And it just makes it, I think, look a bit more natural. Leaf litter. This stuff is quite big leaves, which I don't really like, to be honest. You can see they're pretty massive. So what I do is grab the dust and broken up bits that land towards the bottom and then sprinkle it about like that. The odd little bit here that's full, doesn't matter, you can cover it up with a bit of moss, blend it in a bit more. Bits like that you can break up and chuck a bit of dirt over. Nothing too crazy. Just gives a bit of texture to what you've already got in there, I think. Chuck a couple of big bits about, because you don't only get small leaves on the forest floor, do you? So mix a bit up in there as well. I'm not going completely crazy with it. It's literally just, say, 3 or 4 large leaves snapped up, and we chuck a bit more substrate over the top of it all like this. It just blends it in. Yeah. So that, once it's dried out a bit, see it a bit better now. I'm just going to zoom out because it looks weird sometimes when you... There we go. So, very simple. It doesn't take too long to put together. We've been doing it 20 minutes, but I've been banging on. And that will do. So, as you can see, the hide is nice and full of substrate. There's plenty of it to dig towards the back. Drainage there is enough, it's not too much. Big water dish, help keep the humidity up. Bit of moss on top that you can give a light mist in once it's dried out. Don't soak it all the time, they don't need that. Just wet it when it's dry with like a couple of spritzes from a water bottle, like done. And give it somewhere to dig. It might just use the hide as it is. It might dig it out, that's what I'm hoping. That's why I've left it sort of open towards the front. So it's kind of forced maybe to do a little bit of digging. But a lot of them just like to sit out. The LPs I know sit out a lot. And the T. apophysis will burrow when they're younger, but not necessarily stay in the burrow all the time. So we'll see what happens with that one. But for now, I think that's pretty good. Later, we'll do the rehouse soon.